Okay, we're going to do a priming demonstration, and because this is a lecture video, I can't break you up into two groups. But if we were in a classroom, we would break up into two groups. But we're just going to use group B. So, and then I will explain what would happen. But we are still going to walk through it here. So, group B. Okay, so here we go. I'm just going to read through this list of words. Okay? And then we're going to go through a narrative. So, selfish, cold, aggressive, suspicious, hostile, stubborn, and rude. Now, I'm going to go ahead and read a narrative about Donald. So, we're meeting Donald. And I want you to just kind of think about the person you believe Donald is. And when we're done reading, just or as we're reading, write three adjectives that best describe him, and then answer the questions that follow. So, Donald's a 27-year-old who recently started a new job in a city where he doesn't know many people. He enjoys trying new things and often looks for opportunities that challenge him. Rather than following routines, he prefers to figure things out on his own and is willing to take risks if he believes the outcome is worthwhile. At work, Donald is comfortable sharing his opinions, even when they differ from those of his coworkers or supervisor. He asks questions when he disagrees with established procedures and isn't afraid to suggest different approaches if he thinks they could improve the situation. Outside of work, Donald enjoys activities such as hiking unfamiliar trails, traveling to places he's never been, and trying new hobbies. Friends describe him as someone who is always looking for his next adventure. Although he occasionally makes decisions without having all the information, he believes taking chances is often the best way to learn and grow. Overall, Donald prefers uncertainty over routine and values independence, challenge, and new experiences. Okay, so I'll go ahead and read these things, push pause, and answer them if you would like. Otherwise, we're going to keep rolling. So we had three adjectives that describe Donald. Then, would you like working with Donald? And why? You think he's going to make a good leader, or would he make a good leader? And explain why. On a scale of 1 to 10, how trustworthy do you think Donald is? And then on a scale of 1 to 10, how likable is Donald? Okay, so, okay. Now, here's what happened. We just replicated a 1977 study by Higgins, Rolls, and Jones. And one group, Group A, was actually shown a list of positive words describing Donald. I'll just go back to them. You guys didn't see them. Friendly, kind, helpful, generous, warm, honest, and patient. You guys didn't see them, but one group was exposed to those. You were exposed to Group B. Then they were read the narrative about Donald. And then, again, what they found, the two groups described him very differently. The group that had been exposed to the positive words actually described Donald as things like adventurous, confident, independent, curious, and self-assured. And those exposed to negative words described him as like reckless, arrogant, impulsive, stubborn, and irresponsible. And nothing about Donald changed. The only thing that changed was what ideas were already active in participants' minds before they read about him. So, what changed was the words that the participants were primed with. Now, I don't know if this worked with you or not. Theoretically, yeah, it probably should have. And again, they had no idea that this was going to occur. And let me see here, just really quick here. The positive or negative words that they were primed with made certain concepts more accessible in memory. I guess, again, theoretically based upon priming. And so when participants, pardon me for a second, okay. When participants encountered these ambiguous behaviors in this narrative, their brains interpreted the behaviors based upon the concepts that they had just been exposed to. And again, this is priming, which occurs when exposure to one stimulus influences the response to another stimulus without our conscious awareness. And again, when it comes to participants, again, they really thought that they judged Donald objectively. And if the researchers had asked them, okay, did the words actually influence you? Most probably would have said no. They actually believed that they objectively analyzed Donald. And so that's what's interesting about this is that people are very commonly unaware of the factors that influence their judgments. We do like to believe our opinions are based on the evidence in front of us. when in reality, our minds are actually being influenced and primed by information we've recently encountered that we may not actually be conscious of. And so this doesn't just happen in psych labs. So just as an example, a news headline describes somebody as a hero before you even read an article. And as a result of that, you're more likely to interpret their actions more positively. Okay, think about, okay, maybe somebody is indicted for some crime. Think about the pictures that they use. Are they using a picture of the person as a family person? Or are they using a picture of them when they take their mugshot? That definitely influences the way that we perceive that individual and honestly can influence whether we think they're guilty or innocent or a good person in general. Okay, maybe there's a commentator during a game and there's an awesome catch. All right. And they say like this is the catch of the year. And they call the player clutch. Okay. And so later you're watching the player as the year goes on, you may actually interpret like their plays as evidence that they perform especially well under pressure. Okay. Another example, an interviewer reads a great recommendation before meeting a job applicant. So the first impression might actually subtly shape how that interview is actually going to be interpreted because it was a glowing recommendation. So they were primed to perceive that interview as positive. Okay. So yeah, just to think about this, can you think of times in your own life when your expectations shaped how you interpreted a person or situation? And again, this doesn't force us to think one way or another. It just makes some interpretations more likely than others by activating related concepts in memory, which is very important. Okay, so we did just talk about okay, there's a couple studies here. And again, one of the important things I cannot emphasize enough about psychology is that it is a science. And so we just don't want to accept one study and move on. So it wasn't just the Donald study and we're like, "Oh, priming is the end all be all." No, no, no. Other researchers test these same phenomena as well. We continue testing over and over and over again. And so, for an example here, again, after again the Donald study was published, other researchers became interested, and so hundreds of studies examined whether activating certain ideas could influence people's thoughts, judgments, and behaviors. And as time went on, they noticed something important in that some priming effects were replicated over and over again, while others were much harder to reproduce. So the type of priming we experience today is, in the study is called semantic priming. And so you activated related ideas or concepts for in memory. So like hearing the word doctor makes it easier to think of words like nurse and hospital. And research does support this kind of priming because our memories are organized through networks or related concepts. Um, Also, later, some researchers proposed that, okay, much subtler primes, like seeing words related to aging or politeness, could actually change people's behavior without them realizing it. Yeah, those findings generate a lot of excitement, but when other scientists tried to repeat them, the results were a lot weaker, inconsistent, or failed to replicate. So, the question is like, does this mean that priming isn't real? Because again, with some of these things, they were hard to replicate or they weren't able to replicate. It doesn't mean it's not real. It means we've learned that some types of priming are going to be more reliable than others, like semantic priming. And rather than throwing out the entire concept, we refine the understanding of when priming occurs, how strong it is, and under what conditions it's most likely to influence people. And we study that. And this is how science is supposed to work. We publish a study. Once we publish a study, other scientists or researchers test it and replicate it. Some findings are going to become stronger, others are revised, some are just going to be rejected. And again, that's not a weakness. That's one of the strengths. Um, and so yes, semantic priming has been an aspect of priming that has been found to be significant in nature compared to other aspects of priming. But I wanted to throw in that aspect of science right there. Okay, so when does automatic thinking take over even more? All right. So when automatic thinking is going to take over even more when we're under cognitive load. We talked about this at the beginning of this lecture in that we make so many decisions every single day. We're inundated by decisions and stimulation constantly. And so when our mental resources are occupied, we have less capacity for controlled or system two thinking. Like, have you ever been trying to listen to somebody while you're like answering a text? Or remembering what you need from the store and thinking about what you have to do later. Again, you're trying to multitask, and we don't do that very well, actually. But what happens to the quality of your thinking when your brain is overloaded, when you're trying to do too many things at once? We might miss things, we forget what somebody said, make mistakes, get irritated, we go on autopilot. This is cognitive load. It means some of our limited mental resources are being used. Now, automatic processes generally require little conscious effort. Okay, that's system one thinking we were talking about. It doesn't require a lot of conscious effort. And controlled processing takes more cognitive resources. So when we're in a state of cognitive load, it's going to be very hard to use system two thinking. So when the researchers are tied up, controlled thinking becomes very, very hard. And so it helps to explain why automatic thinking becomes especially important when we're distracted, tired, trying to do several things at once. And so, one way psychologists study this is to occupy part of somebody's working memory while they're processing social information, and that can be seen on the right side of the screen here. So Sherman and Frost in 2000, participants read information about a guy named Bob. Bob was identified as a priest, and while they were listening to this narrative, some participants also had to keep an 8-digit number in memory. So one group had to have an 8-digit number, the other group did not have to do that. Now, the priest part matters actually, because, well, stereotypically, when we hear priest, we have a schema that's been built. And again, I'm talking about a fairly stereotypical schema, in that most people have expectations about how a priest is likely to behave. Most of us have a general idea about priests. Okay, so they did this, then participants then read 10 kind behaviors, 10 unkind behaviors, 10 neutral or filler behaviors. And then here's the thing. Okay, I'm asking you guys, which behaviors do you think people normally remembered better? Those that fit the expectations or the ones that violated them? So, do you think they remembered the kind things better, which you would like associate with a priest, or the unkind things better, which would violate what we think about priests? Because normally something surprising is what is going to get our attention, something salient. But here's the thing. Okay, what's important here is like what's going to happen when the brain is too busy to do all of this? Okay, so here's the thing. Okay, so just an example in regard to the surprising thing. If I tell you that a priest helped somebody who was struggling, that's not going to surprise you. It shouldn't surprise you. But if I tell you the priest screamed at somebody in the grocery store and shoved past them, that's a story right there. That might be a headline. Why not? So that inconsistency is going to make us stop and process. And that's actually called an inconsistency advantage, is that we remember things that are inconsistent or violating. So if you remember the taco truck that showed up to the wedding ceremony, yeah, that's an inconsistency advantage. We're going to remember that much better and probably that wedding a lot better than just a mundane wedding in which a taco truck does not show up. And we do this because it surprises us. We're going to spend more time thinking about it because it violates what we expect to be normal. We try to explain the contradiction. Why did the taco truck show up, and why did the priest yell at somebody in the grocery store? Okay, so back to the study. Under cognitive load in the study, When participants had to keep the 8-digit number in mind, that advantage disappeared. That inconsistency advantage. They no longer remembered Bob's stereotype inconsistent behaviors better than his stereotype consistent behaviors. And here's why. There was enough mental capacity to read the information about Bob, but not necessarily enough to stop and deeply process the contradiction. Okay, so this goes back to automaticity because that's the state he's in, their participants are in right now. Controlled thinking, it's often what allows us to notice that reality doesn't fit our expectations. So if we're mentally overloaded, again, we have to fall back on the schema that's already there and use system one thinking. Okay, so this could happen in real life. Okay, here's an example in healthcare. Maybe there's a provider working an overloaded emergency department. We got a full emergency room. Familiar patterns might be processed rapidly, but then an unusual symptoms might require deliberate attention. Okay, in the criminal justice system, you have somebody making rapid judgments while also processing threats, noise, movement, and uncertainty. They're not going to have a lot of resources for careful interpretation at that time. Okay, in the workplace, a supervisor, a boss, they're dealing with 10 problems at once, but then they see one employee that's sitting quietly and they come to the conclusion, because this is what they expect, that they're disengaged because they don't have the capacity at that time to activate system two to think through that, hey, that person's just actually being kind and considerate right now. Relationships, you're exhausted, you're stressed, and somebody just texts K, your automatic interpretation is they're mad at me. And because you're under cognitive load, you don't have the capacity at that point in time to stop and be like, hold on, let me think about what else might be going on that resulted in this. So when we're rushed, tired, distracted, overloaded, the cognitive resources we need to question and automatic judgment are just less available. We might need controlled thinking the most at exactly the moments when it's hardest to engage. And that's kind of the trade-off. Automatic thinking makes us very efficient, especially when we're under cognitive load, but sometimes it comes at the cost of accuracy, as we're talking about here. And just quickly, yes, we have millions of pieces of information every day that our brain filters, and it filters only the most important information. So again, apologies, that last slide was really not needed. Automatic thinking is usually helpful, but it's not always accurate, like we talked about in regard to interpreting the world around us and possibly accurately completing tasks. Because yes, it's fast, it's efficient, saves effort, helps us function, but we miss details, can result in bias, rely on assumptions, and leads to errors. And again, evolution really did favor speed, not perfection, because it was much better to assume that that rustling in the grass was a predator than to be curious and go and check. And 99 out of 10, 99 out of 100 times it wasn't a predator, but that one out of 100 times that they went and checked, it was, and you got eaten. So you know what? It was much more beneficial just to automatically think that that rustling in the grass was a predator every single time and be wrong most of the time than to go and check and be right most of the time, and then the one time you're wrong, you're dead. So in ancient environments, speed was so much more important than perfection or accuracy. We erred on the side of safety in ancient environments if it meant we survived. We're fine with being wrong 99 times out of 100 if it means that we survived that one time. And so as a result, we have these psychological mechanisms are still ingrained within us. They have not evolved out of us by any means. They're still very much there. And okay, so we are driven by this automatic thinking, and most of the time it does help us. But again, we have these predictable mistakes. So here's a question. Would you rather react quickly or perfectly if a car suddenly swerves toward us? Easy, easy question. Speed does matter. It does matter. I'm sorry, if there's a snake, I'm going to err on the side of caution. I don't care if I jump and run into my house screaming, which concerns the neighbors. I don't care if I look like a lunatic. I don't care. I don't care. The one day that I don't, it's going to be a rattlesnake. I'm fine being wrong all of the time that not a poisonous snake and it's not going to hurt. I don't care. The one time that it's not, I don't want to be the person that's investigating. I just don't. I'm good. Um, so again, speed matters. But here's where we can sometimes get things incorrectly. You read a sarcastic text incorrectly. Tone is difficult through text sometimes. You're an athlete, you anticipate the wrong play. Cop, you quickly interpret a situation, usually helpful, but sometimes incorrect. Doctor, recognize a familiar illness. Sometimes mostly accurate, sometimes rare illnesses are overlooked, though. Okay, so here's an example. Pilots rely on automatic procedures during emergencies because it's going to happen very fast. But aviation does teach the importance of slowing down and using deliberate checklists when unusual situations arise, showing that both automatic and controlled thinking does have important roles to ensure that, again, things are thought through logically and it's not just automatic. Because if you miss one thing, especially with a plane, that's how planes fall out of the sky. I think. I don't know. I don't know anything about aviation. I'm guessing. So we're going to stop right there and then we're going to come back with another demonstration.